Hey, hope you're doing well. Andy here from Drive Steady, and today I'm reviewing the Porsche Taycan and comparing it to some of its competition from Audi, Tesla, and Mercedes. I'll share my thoughts on the interior, exterior, and of course take it for a quick drive. So let's get started with this review of the Porsche Taycan. Alright, so let's get started with the review by first thanking Porsche of downtown LA for giving me access to this Taycan today. If you happen to be interested in this car or any other new or pre-owned Porsche product, make sure you give them a call. I've left their information in the description below. Now, let's talk about pricing and trim levels very quickly for the Taycan. It's now up to 5 different trim levels, and this one I have today is the 4S, which sits right above the standard rear-wheel drive model and gets you an additional motor, more power, and of course all-wheel drive. All for a price tag of $106,000, which represents a $20,000 increase over the base rear-wheel drive. Alright, so let's put pricing aside for a moment and talk about the looks, because I've had the privilege of experiencing some of the direct competitors for the Taycan, like the e-tron GT RS, the Mercedes AMG EQS, and also of course the Tesla Model S Plaid. And in my opinion, I think the Taycan is the best looking of the bunch. And to take it even further, in case you didn't know, there's also a wagon layout of the Taycan now, and I think that is the best looking EV on the road by a mile. But not taking anything away from the regular Taycan sedan, I think it's still an eye-catching car with sporty touches, and countering it with some elegance, it is a fantastic looking car for sure. Alright, so because this is an EV car, let's get into the nitty-gritty about the motors, the battery, the range, the charging, etc. Starting off with the motor. So because this is a 4S trim level, you get 2 motors, one in the front and one in the rear. As far as batteries go, you have 2 choices. One is 79 kilowatts an hour, the other one is 93. Now if you decided to go with the standard 79 kilowatt an hour battery, you get 429 horsepower and 472 pounds-feet of torque. Now if you decided to use launch control, your power gets a little boosted up to 522. Now if you decided to go with the larger battery pack, 93 kilowatts an hour gets you a healthy power bump up to 482 horsepower, and the torque remains the same at 472. And with the launch control, you get 562 horsepower with the larger battery pack. Now, the transmission, so there are 2 of those as well. There's one for the front and then there's one for the rear. The front is a single speed, the rear is a 2-speed transmission for extra range and highway driving. Now, one other thing about the batteries, if you decided to go with a 93 kilowatt an hour battery, just like this car is equipped with, you get a weight penalty to the tune of 176 pounds. So this car is heavier than the equivalent 79 kilowatt an hour battery car. But what does all of this wonderful stuff equate to? A 0 to 60 time of 3.8 seconds, and that number doesn't increase or decrease depending on the battery pack. So 79 or 93, 0 to 60 is 3.8 seconds, it doesn't matter. The larger battery pack gets you a longer range. Alright, so speaking of range, the smaller battery pack, 73 kilowatts, gets you 199 miles of range in the 4S. And if you opt for the bigger battery pack, 227. So this is rated by the EPA. Now, if you went to the Porsche's website, you'll see a term on there, AMCI testing range. And basically what that is Porsche didn't really like what the EPA rated the Taycan's range at, so they said, all right, we're getting our own third party. So the third party rated the 4S at 247 for the smaller battery and 272 for the larger battery. And I also did some separate research, and indeed there were several outlets out there that basically crushed the EPA's rating in the 4S trim level. So keep that in mind, and your results may vary with the range. Okay, so you used up all of your range and now you need to charge it back up. So let's talk about charging. So the Taycan is built on a 800 volt architecture, which means you can AC slow charge or DC fast charge. And with either of the battery packs, you can use 800 volt high speed DC fast charging, and that'll get you from 5% to 80% charge in roughly 22.5 minutes. If you're using the regular 400 volt DC charging, it'll take you 93 minutes. And if you use the AC fast charge, it will take you 9.5 hours Now, one thing to keep in mind, and I also saw this in the Audi e-tron GT, is that the Taycan has two charging ports. There's one on the driver's side, which is a slow charging unit, and then the passenger side unit is where you'll be able to fast charge. So make sure you distinguish and you plug in the right ones. Obviously, if you go to a fast charging station and you try to plug it in on that driver's side, it's probably not going to fit, but just keep that in mind when you're pulling in to your local DC fast charger. Alright, so now let's talk about the suspension setup in the Taycan. And this thing has something similar to what the Panamera has, but of course uniquely tuned for its own chassis. It's called the 4D suspension, and it comes standard with PASM, and it's riding on adaptive dampers with air shocks. So you have the ability to firmen or soften up the ride based off your driving conditions, and you also have the ability to raise the ride height and lower it from the infotainment system, and the car has the ability to do it on its own as well. Now let's talk about something very unique on this car, and those are the 21-inch Mission E wheels. And the reason why they're unique, it's a very expensive package because it comes built in with some other things, and also the spec of this car is very unique as well. So it's got the Mission E wheels, which will set you back $5,000. They're 21 inches on all four corners. They're by 9.5 up front and by 11.5 in the rear. And because you decided to go with these 21-inch Mission E wheels, you have to upgrade to the Porsche surface coated wheels with the tungsten carbide finish that gives it that mirror look. And these are larger brakes as well compared to standard. There's 16 inches up front and 14 inches in the rear. 6-piston brake calipers in the front, a 4-piston in the rear. Now these wheels are also painted in the platinum finish, which is an additional like $1,500. So this upgrade to the 21-inch wheels with the brakes and the platinum finish costs basically almost $10,000. Let's not forget about the tires as well, 265s up front and 305s in the rear. So with that out of the way, now let's switch to practicality and talk about cargo space, and then jump onto the interior and wrap it up with the drive. Alright, so now let's talk about practicality and some daily usage things, starting off with cargo space. So because this is an electric car, you have two storage compartments. You obviously have the trunk back here, and you've got a frunk because there is no front engine or a front compartment where you can put your stuff. Now there are multiple ways of opening these compartments. There's a button on the interior, or buttons on the interior. There's buttons on the key, one for the rear compartment and one for the front. There's also a button right here on top of the license plate, and there's also a kicking motion you can use for the back trunk, but in the front you're basically limited to the button on the key or the button on the interior. So let's open this thing up and talk about the space. So this thing beeps while it's opening, which is quite interesting. I haven't noticed in some of the other manufactured cars I've driven with electronic trunks. But nonetheless, you have a combined cargo space of 17.2. So there's about 3 feet in the front and 14.3 cubic feet of space back here. If you wanted to, you have the ability to fold down the rear seats, and I believe that expands the cargo space to up to 47 cubic feet of space. But nonetheless, this is a very generous amount of room considering that this is a smaller car than the Panamera. And when you fold down the rear seats, it gives you that much more space. You can definitely fit 2 larger pieces of equipment in here. The front compartment is a little smaller, I would say like a briefcase or a duffel bag. Closing the trunk is electronic closing as well, pushing a button here and it closes automatically, which is one of the best features. Now let me go on to the interior and tell you about what it's like in there. Alright, so now the interior of the Taycan, and I'm going to start off with the quality topic, and this is a really high quality interior. Now one thing to check your expectation on is generally when you drive these EV cars, they're more geared towards using materials that are environmentally friendly and things like that. So you're not going to find as much luxury in here. This is the standard level leather package in this Taycan. But when I drove, for example, the Mercedes EQS and then compared that to the S-Class, there's a drastic difference. The S-Class, the non-EV car, has much better quality even with the upgraded leather and materials in the EQS, and I find the same thing in here. Now, it's not to say that it's bad in here. The base level leather is actually really nice, very simply laid out. The design is very, very cool. I think this is one of the better interiors for the EV cars that I've driven. It strikes a nice balance between a bunch of technology and also tactile feeling things that you can touch and use. And even though there are basically no buttons in here, very few, just some on the door, and basically basically none here in the center section. Everything is like a touchscreen. It still gives you a decent balance of driving a traditional non-EV car and driving an EV car. So the overall quality and the fit and the finish is fantastic. Talking about the size, this is definitely smaller than a Panamera. It's basically the same size as the e-tron GT. I feel like the Tesla might even be a little bit larger than this, and the AMG EQS is the largest of the EVs, both in the back seat, which I'll get to here in a second, and also here in this front area. But as far as the sizing here, I'm 5'11". I fit just fine in here. Somebody several inches taller than me can fit in here. I'm not even adjusted to the lowest seat setting. So this car does have the premium package, which gives you the 14-way seat. As standard, I believe you get an 8-way seat. But the 14-way seat is very, very comfortable. Now, to upgrade to the 18-way seat, I believe it's an extra $1,400. And the 18-way seats are the most comfortable seats. But these are actually very comfortable as well. They have decent bolstering, decent aggression. You can adjust everything. You have extending thigh support. And it's a really nice seat to sit in for daily drivability as well. All right, so now let's talk about technology, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in here. Starting off with the screens, this car is equipped with 3 screens. You can get an optional 4th one. So there's a 16-inch widescreen curved display out in front of you as a gauge cluster. It's almost like an infotainment screen by itself up there. And then the infotainment screen itself is 10.9 inches. And then you have a separate 8.4-inch screen, which is mounted in portrait style. And this is more of a climate control system, more of a shortcut menu than the former 2 that I just mentioned. So now let me talk about some of the details of these screens. So the one out in front of you, the 16.8-inch widescreen, is gorgeous. It's crisp, it's clear, the graphics are beautiful, it's very futuristic, very nice to look at. And the interesting thing about it is that they have tactile buttons here, or tactile touchscreen buttons over here flanking the left and the right. So your headlights and your fog lights are here on the left, and several other shortcuts here on the right related to the car itself, traction control, the suspension, your ride height, and the shortcut menu. All right, so now let me move on into the infotainment screen. And again, this is a 10.9-inch screen. It is wonderful to look at, but my favorite thing design-wise or physically about it is that it's blended into the dash, and it's not some screen that's popped up here on top of the dash and it kind of looks funny. So that's actually really, really nice. Now, the infotainment system itself is actually the simplified version of PCM. This is going into the 2022 models of the 911. I saw this in the new GTS that I drove, the Cabriolet. That was a fantastic car, by the way. But this is a very simplified system compared to what you find in the 911s and then the Panameras and the Cayennes. But everything is just laid out here in simple widgets. The nice thing about it is you have the ability to rearrange the icons. Now, even though it is simple, there are some other menus that can go into deeper settings and things like that, and you can configure and adjust your profile the way you like. But overall, I really like this version of PCM. It's very easy to get used to because it's so simple. All right, so now let's talk about this 8.4-inch portrait layout screen, and this is mainly for shortcuts and for controlling your air conditioning system. So these shortcuts primarily resemble what you see in non-EV cars in the Porsche lineup, where they've got several rows of shortcuts right at the top of the center control area. And this is mounted up here, or displayed in the screen, up right at the top of the screen. So you've got a navigation one, you've got a media one, phone, and settings. And then right underneath that, you have the ability to control the air conditioning system, your heated and cooled seats. And I really like this screen because it's much closer to where you would rest your arm, and it's just much easier to kind of reach here as opposed to reaching in the infotainment system. So now let's move to the rear, and I'll talk to you about what it's like over there. All right, so now let's talk about the back seats in the Taycan, and starting off with the overall size. So I'm 5'11", I am sitting behind myself, and you can see that I have plenty of leg room, but headroom is a little different. So as I put my head back in the headrest, I can feel my hair touching the back part here of this roof area, and I would say maybe another inch or two, my head is going to be touching the glass roof here. So keep that in mind. If you're a taller individual, maybe 6 feet max would probably fit back here, and somebody taller might be a little more uncomfortable. But this car also has the 2+1 seating arrangement, so I'm going to scooch on over here and give you a perspective of that. So as I sit here in the center, my head is definitely now touching the glass roof as I sit straight up. And it's somewhat of an uncomfortable position, to be honest with you, having that feeling of my hair touching the glass. So definitely 5'11", no taller than 6 feet tall. Again, you are basically going to have to hunch over because your head is going to be touching the glass at this point. But overall, it's just an extra seat that you have the ability to carry around an extra passenger. But a child will definitely be much more suitable here. As far as 3 adults, you're probably going to have some shoulder room issues, but obviously you can make it work for a short period of time. Now, some of the other amenities, there is 4 climate control zones in this car, so you have the ability to control them independently here in the back seats from this screen. And the cool thing about it, and I also saw this in the front, these vents are controlled via this screen. It's such a cool thing. I saw this in the Panamera as well. So really cool and neat looking thing that people will probably play around with back here. Now, one of the interesting things is because this thing has a 2+1 layout back here, it seems like you lose the charging ports in the back seats, which would generally be right here in front of the screen. And it seems like there's an extra panel here that it's either behind this panel, and I don't want to take it off because I don't want to assume that it's back there and break something. But if you know whether you lose the charging ports if you go 2+1, please let me know in the comments below. And then you've got a center armrest here that has 2 cup holders. This is the same armrest, or at least it seems like the same one that's in the Panamera. And obviously you do have the glass roof to look out of. But if I had to say, as far as back room space, the Mercedes EQS is the largest of the interiors, both for the front and for the rear. It's the most luxurious of the EV interiors that I've driven. And then the Audi and then the Porsche are very similar as far as legroom and overall quality and things like that. But I do like the interior of the Taycan much better in all aspects, not just quality or space in general. I just like it more in general. And then the Tesla is kind of in a different league of its own with the interior. The space is very similar to the Taycan, but that is just kind of like so EV-ish. I mentioned at the outset that this strikes a nice balance between EV and kind of like a traditional car. And then the Tesla is just so EV with this big center screen and basically no buttons. So that's basically my perspective of the interior. I really like this place a lot in comparison to the 3 other EVs that I've driven. So with that out of the way, let me go ahead and switch gears and go to the driving portion of the review and see what this thing feels like behind the wheel. Alright, so now the driving portion of the review, and as always, this is what the key looks like, just a regular Porsche key, nothing really exciting or extravagant about it. As far as visibility goes, when you look at the front, there is some type of hint of the headlights looking like 911 lights, so that's really cool. But the visibility all around you is fantastic. This has a 360-degree camera that you can switch between viewing angles and such, so it's great. Now, the price of this car, this being a 2011 model, the base price was $103,800, and that has gone up, I believe, roughly $3,000. And the total price of this car is $136,780. So this thing has over $30,000 in options. So it's quite a expensive spec with those wheels. Remember those wheels, tires, brakes. I talked about that by itself is 10 grand. This also has the what else does it have? The premium pack, which costs $7,000, and the performance battery that costs $6,500. So you can make this thing go up in price rather easily. Of course, that's pretty normal for Porsche cars. So this thing is actually running now. Is the beauty of EV cars. You never know whether they're on or not, but it's on. So let's go ahead and go for a quick spin, and then the transmission selector is here up on the dash. And I'm setting off here in normal mode. And the thing I noticed first driving this thing is how normal it feels. And by that, I don't mean obviously when you're going at speed, there is no transmission shift and the engine sound, of course, and those take a little bit of time to get used to. But what I mean by that is here, as I'm driving at normal speed, it almost feels gas powered. And I think Porsche is doing that on purpose to blur the line between gas powered and EV. And it's a really, really smooth, engaging car here in normal mode. But I'm gonna go ahead and put it in Sport Plus mode, and let's see how this thing feels. And the Sport exhaust or Sport engine note is on, and let's go. Foot to the floor now. Wow. Very fast, very, very fast. It does lose a little bit of steam up at the top once you're moving, but I'm going a decent speed now. Yeah, at the lower speeds, accelerating, it does a fantastic job. And it's really, really fast. Oh, brakes are good as well. Oh, wow, look at that. Good braking. And it's really addicting and so easy to access the speed. You just mash the gas and it just flies. Really, really nice sensation of speed here. And then what does Porsche call this thing? Let me go on here. It's called, Porsche calls it electric sports sound. So that actually sounds pretty cool for about 5 or 10 minutes or whenever you're driving fast. I said, let me try this when I'm in comfort mode. And then after about 5 minutes, it's like, okay, this sounds kind of annoying. Let me go ahead and turn this off. Unless you're into the whole spaceship theme sound, and it definitely makes that much more audible when this setting is enabled, and you can turn it on or off as you please. It's not tied to a mode. If you're in Sport Plus, it does turn on, but you can turn it off even when you're in Sport Plus. So let's give it some more. Wow, and the sensation of speed with these EV cars, because the sound basically is the same no matter what speed you're going. So you quickly lose track of how fast you're going unless you look down, and then you see this big number and your eyes really open up. But things come and go at a very accelerated pace, and it's super fun actually. All right, so this is a properly fast car, but one thing I do have to caution you about, well, not caution, it's just more for FYI. When I'm in normal mode and I mash the gas, it takes a second. It seems like there's a lag there, and I don't know if it's because the transmission is kicking down to another gear, but in normal mode, you press on the gas and there's about a second to a second and a half delay. The car starts moving and then it really starts moving. Like you're moving in Sport Plus. There isn't the immediacy in the throttle and the takeoff when you're in normal mode. Now, the rest of it, it feels weird not having a transmission. I'm used to saying, oh yeah, the paddle shifters. There are no paddle shifters in the Taycan. So let's just skip over that. The brakes are really, really nice. The one thing about it is I wish they were a touch more sensitive at the top of the brake pedal. That's how I like my pedals, nice and sensitive with a lot of bite at the top. I experienced that in the 911s, the 992 actually that I recently drove. The GTS was fantastic with regards to braking feel. But of course, this being a sporty oriented EV car, it does provide a great amount of braking power. Now let's talk about the steering and the suspension. So the steering is actually really nicely weighted. It's not too heavy and it's not too light. Even when I'm in normal mode, it gives me a decent amount of feedback. And then when I go into Sport and Sport Plus, it does gain a little bit of weight, but not to a point where it's annoying and it's super artificial and way too heavy. Now the suspension, in normal mode, it's magic. And the reason why it's magic is because it's extremely smooth. It's not the most cushioniest. I would say the AMG EQS wins that title, but there's definitely some sportiness in the suspension, even in normal mode, but it definitely maintains its daily drivability. Now, one other thing, as far as this being an EV car, one pedal driving and the recuperation, the braking recuperation. So this, when you let off the accelerator, in other cars, most notably the Tesla Model S, the brake recuperation is extremely aggressive, and you can one pedal drive that thing all day. But it's a different story in the Taycan. So currently I have it off, and I'm going to turn it on, and it's there. You can only feel the difference when you toggle between on and off. If you're used to like a Model S and you jump in here with this thing on, you're gonna be like, what do you mean it's on? So there's a very slight hint of the brake recuperation, and me personally, I prefer that. I don't like an extremely aggressive brake recuperation. Like the Mercedes AMG EQS, I feel like they probably could have tuned that a little better. That has a really aggressive brake recuperation, and when you put it in the highest mode, it's almost like pulling you forward. Now the Tesla is kind of like that as well, but it's really nicely tuned in here. Very light and modest brake recuperation. Probably not one pedal driver friendly unless you time it way in advance. So that's pretty much it as far as the driving. Overall, this is a fantastic car. Let me give you the perspective on its own. It's fantastic. The speed is sensational. The overall look is amazing. The interior, the Porsche car experience is alive and well in here, even though this is kind of tailored more towards technology. A lot of the ergonomics, the fit and the finish, and the general functionality of how things work remain alive in here, kind of like what you see in some of the other non-EV Porsches. It's alive here. Now, comparing it to some of the other stuff. So, if you want the most luxurious, and if you want the cushioniest ride and the largest EV, and somewhat still fast, get the AMG EQS. If you want the fastest one by far from the ones that I've driven, now I haven't driven the Turbo S, get the Tesla Model S Plaid. That is just insanely fast. Now, the most balanced and the most well-rounded, I would say, is the Taycan. And by that, I don't just mean speed and overall suspension and handling and all that stuff. I mean the whole package. Whether it's some of those things I just mentioned, the speed, handling and whatnot, but the looks and the interior, the way everything works. Now, I was kind of tossing back and forth between this and the Audi e-tron GT RS or RS GT. And I think I like this one much better than that because of the interior and the way things work in here. Now, I didn't really like, or not that I don't like, I prefer it much better in here. So that's why I think overall, this 4S trim level is a very compelling package and offers a fantastic balanced EV experience, and let alone that at the outset of the driving portion, I mentioned about how easy it is and how normal it feels. And I think that is going to help a lot of people who are apprehensive about going from gas powered to EV a lot smoother. It's really going to take off that edge from transitioning between gas and electric. So that's pretty much it. If you've got any other questions, please leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram at DriveSteady. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.